welcome everyone to Women in Journalism's Masterclass, focusing on broadcasting. My name is Vivian Francis. I'm on the WIDGE committee. I'm also a senior lecturer at London College of Communication, and I will be sharing tonight's event. The title of this evening's session is How to Find Great Ideas and Commissions, and it will be led by Sara Nourizadeh. Sara is going to be talking about finding inspiration for great ideas and sharing her insights on how to get, or how shows get commissioned. I know that Sara brings a wealth of energy, passion and experience to this masterclass. So the format that we're going to take is that Sara's going to deliver a presentation, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. We'd absolutely love to hear your questions and feedback. So please, if you have anything that you want to share, just pop it in the chat. So over to you, Sara.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. Let me know if you can see that okay. Is that all good?
Yes.
Great, okay. Hi, so my name's Sara Nourizadeh, and for those of you who don't know me or weren't on the last masterclass, I'm an exec producer for 10 years in the media industry. I work at Bloomberg Media Studios, and at Bloomberg I develop, produce and direct advertising content partnerships. And prior to working at Bloomberg, I worked in TV development. And you can see some of the shows that I've worked on here. So basically TV development, for any of you that don't know, is coming up with new ideas for TV shows across a whole range of genres. So you've got everything from kind of factual to entertainment to documentary to features. And then typically you'll get your best ideas and you'll go and pitch them to TV channels. So I've done a lot of development work over the years, and one of the shows that I'm proudest of developing, you can see on the screen here, is called Kids with Cameras. And this idea was actually based around letting kids tell their own stories through video diaries. So we gave them their own cameras and they gave us a perspective on what life was like when hospital becomes home. Another show that I've helped to develop is called Bizarre ER, which was on BBC. And basically my job was to hunt down people from across the globe who'd survived all sorts of miraculous accidents. There was a lady that I interviewed who survived having a grenade in her face. There was a man who survived having a concrete building, half a concrete building land on top of him, and they had to pull him out and he managed to stay alive, and all sorts of weird and wonderful stories. And today I'm here to talk about how to find your great ideas and also how to fight for them, because I think that's a really big part of the development process. So I'll also talk about how we get commissions as well. And I just wanted to get straight into it today and talk about a show on Channel 4 called It's a Sin. Now, judging by audience numbers, lots of you may have watched it already, and I bet if you have, I'm not the only one here that cried after watching it. It was such a brilliant story, and the writer is Russell T Davies, who's a fellow Welshman, I'm glad to say, and he tells the story of a group of friends in the 1980s who were devastated by the AIDS crisis. Now, in my opinion, this was easily one of the best shows of 2021, and it's been critically acclaimed. But what many of you might not know is that Russell had to fight for 5 years to get this show made. He was turned away by Channel 4, the BBC and ITV before he went back around again, and he was able to convince Channel 4 that this idea was worthy of a commission. So looking back, we can see that It's a Sin was a brilliant idea. But at the time, the people in charge just didn't see it. And that's despite the fact that it was Russell T Davies. And, you know, he's a multi-award winning writer behind shows like Queer as Folk, Years and Years, Doctor Who, and loads of other great ones. So the point of this story is, if finding ideas is important, then fighting for them is even more so. And what I really admire about Russell with this story is he didn't just have the great idea, but he also had the conviction and the passion to keep fighting for it until it got made. So this is just one example, and I'm going to talk to you about a couple of other examples and also some of my personal experiences today. And a quick caveat to add here is that I'm definitely not Russell T Davies. I'm still learning about all of this myself, and I've got a way to go. but I can share with you some of the things that I've learned. So let's get into it and talk about finding ideas. So a while back, I was working for a TV company called 24. Now they're a massive company and they've got branches all over the country. They specialize in lots of different kinds of TV. They do lots of entertainment shows. They do lots of documentary shows. And they just have loads of ideas going on at any one time. And if you look at actually their commissions, they're always getting commissions. They do really, really well. They're very successful. And I worked in the development team for the Boomerang division. And it was my job to help them come up with ideas for a slate. So I was in charge of a slate. And we were a really small but effective team developing documentaries, formats, features. And at any one time, my division had 10 to 20 shows that were in development. And I guess for a small team, we really punched above our weight. And I guess you're wondering how we did it with a team of 4, which is pretty small for a development team. Well, what we did was we worked what we like to call the ideas muscle. Probably wondering, what the heck does that mean? Well, it simply means repetition and discipline every single day. So we had to come up with around 5 ideas. That's 5 ideas each every single day. And then we had to stand up and present them to the team. And I guess if you presented a bad one, well, that was its own punishment in itself. But it was relentless. And it really did build up this muscle because we just got so used to doing it. We got so used to looking for ideas every single day because you'd be thinking, oh my God, I've got to bring something to the commissioning meeting tomorrow. And there was all sorts of ideas flying around, you know, people who pamper their pets to cookery shows in weird and wonderful places and game shows, and then hard-hitting documentaries as well. And what we would do is we would take the best ideas that we'd come up with in the group to go and pitch at major channels. So we'd be in BBC, Channel 4, Netflix a couple of times a week trying to sell our shows. And they did sell, and that's because our method of the more ideas you create, the more chance of something sticking actually worked. So we just kept going with new ideas. We became an ideas machine, and we were using the feedback that we had from the commissioners to come up with better ideas. And in all honesty, by the end of it, we were so good. It was like we'd been on a training camp. I think we were exhausted, but after a year of doing that, I went to go and then work for a broadcaster. And I was so experienced at generating lists of ideas. There was a clear difference after that stint of working with that development team that I could literally sit there and just brainstorm and do ideas on my own. So I guess the main point of this is the more that you churn out, the more variety you're going to get, and the better your chances are of stumbling on something truly original. And that's simply what 242 do, sorry, that's their model, and they're really good at it, and they still do it now, and that model still works for them, and it's a brilliant strategy. So another thing that I would like to say about that is, you know, the more that you do that, you do just become tuned in to kind of finding ideas for you know, from everyday life. It might be things that you read, it might be things that you watch, and it might just be places that inspire you. So I guess that's kind of talking about how we approach the ideas generating. But another thing I'd like to talk about is ideas mating. So ideas mating is something that we also do a lot in TV. And this is where you mix 2 ideas so that you get a super powerful idea. And we used to do this a lot as well in 24. We'd sit around a table and we'd write down TV shows on Post-it notes, and then we'd mix them and say, okay, so let me think of an example. What would you get if you mixed I'm a Celebrity, Get Out of Here, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here with a cookery show, like, for example, if it was MasterChef. And I guess then you've got a whole new idea for a cookery show in the jungle where maybe you're doing tasks with disgusting creatures. And then once you've done the task, I don't know, you've got to go and cook with the creatures. It sounds random, but you get the idea. So using this method to come up with ideas really does work. And next, I'm going to tell you about an idea that I found, which I had to fight for. So for this example, I'm going to talk about one of my shows, which is called London's Great Bridges, which eventually ended up being on Channel 4, but I had to fight really hard for this one. And this was when I was working on the development team at ITM Productions, where our output spanned from like Oscar-nominated current affairs shows to high-rating factual shows, and then news programs and kind of everything in between. And I was working on a successful development team, and my job was to find the next big idea that we could pitch to channel commissioners. And one Sunday I was reading the papers, which is always a great way to come up with ideas. I find a lot of my inspiration from reading papers and magazines. And I came across an initiative that the Lord Mayor was running that I thought would be a great idea for a feature show. The concept was basically an idea to light up and renovate all the bridges in London. So imagine like millions of colourful LEDs being attached to these giant historic structures. You know, that in itself, you can imagine, is a huge project and something that would be really interesting to follow. And already, you know, I was pitching the show in my head. I could imagine it would be like a makeover show. So I'm thinking grand designs for London's bridges, mixed with fascinating history, art of the bridges, the engineering, and then also just the observational filmmaking aspect of how you get these lights onto the bridges. And to me, that felt like all the great ingredients for a feature show. So I think it was the Monday after, I jumped on the idea straight away. And, you know, if you're a development person, you'll be quite familiar with securing access. So I called up the Mayor of London's office and I set up a meeting with them to talk about getting access to this project so that ITM would have it. And I was able to secure the exclusive access, which, you know, was a really big deal. So I'd hustled exclusive access, which was really exciting. And now it was already becoming more than just an idea. So I was getting ready to go back to my pitch meeting at ITM, and I thought my boss would be really pleased about this idea. And I couldn't wait to get back. And then I got to our Wednesday meeting, and it was him and a couple of other people in the room, and pitched the idea to them, you know, full of enthusiasm. And he just looked at me and just said, no, this idea like isn't going to go anywhere. It's just a couple of fairy lights on a bridge. And that basically I'd wasted my time. So as you can imagine, I was really deflated. And number one, I was just really disappointed with the idea itself because I thought it was a good one. And number two, it just really shook me because I thought that my radar was off. So I thought, hang on, I think this is an amazing idea, but it's gone down like a cup of cold sick. So I started to think about what else could I be wrong about? What other ideas maybe aren't very good? But I'd heard about people fighting for ideas before, and I just had a gut feeling that this was something that was worth fighting for. So alongside the rest of my workload, I kept pushing forward with the idea. So I'd flash it out. I'd think about how we could turn it into a series. And to be honest, I just kept nagging my boss as well. So every week I'd go into the pitch meeting and say, oh, well, I've actually thought about this, which would, you know, make this a bigger series, or I've thought about these contributors, or I've thought about how we can make this feel bigger because there's a certain aspect that we can also follow alongside, you know, the current show that I put together. Maybe we could make it a competition, or maybe we could have like a live light up, which would be, you know, a real visual spectacle. And I had to like nag him quite a lot, if I'm honest. And it was only through sheer determination that I eventually got to put it on our slate to pitch to a commissioner at Channel 4. So my boss did come round to the idea, but I guess like in the same way that the people who rejected Russell T Davies realised It's a Sin was a good idea, he just needed some time to get there. And when we did take it to Channel 4, they were really excited. In fact, the commissioners liked the project so much that they greenlit 3 one-hour episodes on Saturday nights at 7 p.m, which is a pretty big deal in TV. So it was a great slot and it was a huge win. And as brilliant and successful as my boss was, on this he was wrong. In the same way that on other occasions, some of my other ideas that may have seemed great to me, they didn't have the appeal to get through a commissioning process. And that's a really valuable lesson to learn. And I think no matter how experienced someone is, no one is right 100% of the time. So I wanted to share this story because this fight did pay off, and we made the series. It's now available to watch on All 4, which is a very shameless plug, I admit. But my takeaways here are, one, don't be afraid to voice your ideas. Don't be afraid to fail. If there's somebody else that you can ask about your ideas, I think that's always a brilliant way as well to kind of find out if your radar's off. Ask other people what they think about the idea. Maybe it can be people outside of your team. And then the next thing is, once you've got that idea, as you can see from this story, having the idea is just the start, but you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to get people on your side. You're going to have to make your idea bigger and better if you need to get it over the line. So I mentioned there a little bit about having people that can help you. And I think this is a really important one. So finding ideas allies. So people who champion you and people who champion your ideas is going to be one of your greatest assets, especially if you're a person that's going into development or a person that's going to be pitching. And basically, you need to have people that are going to be on your side, and you need to have people that you can run things by. And, this was actually the case in my Channel 4 story that I just told you about. I was able to go to another female exec in our team. And I said to her, look, our boss hates this idea, but I love it. I think it's a really good idea. I don't know if I should keep on fighting. Is there any merit in this? And this exec really helped me get it across the line. She believed in it too. She thought it was a great idea. She gave me some steers, and we went and chased after it together, and she was brilliant. And at the end of the day, without her, maybe it wouldn't have happened, if she didn't get involved. So I think having somebody that you can turn to and somebody that you can trust is going to be really valuable for you as well. And I think a point to mention there is, stereotypically women always seem to be pitted against each other, but actually I found that some of my best allies and my best mentors have been women. So I think it's really important to ask yourself, can you find some allies? Can you take your ideas to somebody else? And as I said, it doesn't have to be people in your team necessarily. It doesn't even have to be somebody that's more senior than you. Some of my best allies have been in different industries. So I think this is a really good way to collaborate with people as well. And again, building up your network. And if you all work together, eventually you can get ahead together as well. So for me, having that somebody to check in with meant that I could just calibrate and actually gauge whether my idea was good enough, and it gave me the confidence to actually go ahead. So my learnings from this whole experience are, allies can help with knowing when to fight. They can also help you with knowing when to give up the fight. And allies can help edit you and make your ideas better. So ask them for the feedback. In the case of my story, this exec said to me, who else can you get involved? Who are some of the big people that we can get behind this project? How can we make this a bigger spectacle than, just kind of following observational documentary wise? What are the big kind of moments that we can have in this? And that really, really helped me. Another thing to say is, lots of us suffer from imposter syndrome or self-doubt. And I think this is another reason why having an ally or having people that you can trust is really important. By having that somebody that you can talk to and having that that honest conversation, it's huge. And especially if you want to get your big ideas off the ground. So this leads us nicely now onto talking about doubt and imposter syndrome. And this is another story about someone else again. So if you've got kids or you've been in tune with pop culture over the past couple of years, I'm sure you will have heard of the film Frozen. I really like the story of how this got made. So I think it tells us something very important about fighting for ideas. So the writer of Frozen is Jennifer Lee, and she's a screenwriter who worked on this film script for Frozen, and it took her 5 years. So a bit like It's a Sin, that also took 5 years. I don't know why 5 years seems to be the magic number. But the idea got turned down time and time again. And every time it got turned down, she would develop it, she'd go away, she'd make tweaks. And then towards the end of this process, she got to a point where she thought, hang on a minute, what about if I change some of the characters? So in every single past version, the main character had been this evil queen, and that was the idea, and she was sticking to it. But as she got knocked back again and again, she had what I really considered to be the genius skill, which was to take another look at her story. She adapted it to the feedback that she was getting, rewrote the first act, reinvented the villain as a tortured hero, and as if by magic, Frozen became the most successful animated movie ever, and everybody lived happily ever after. So again, another really simple message from Jennifer's story is, not to give up. You have to keep refining your ideas. You have to keep making them better. You have to keep that process going, use the feedback, because eventually you will get there. And it's even small tweaks that can make the big differences. I think by having people that can look at your ideas with fresh eyes, well, that can change the whole direction of an idea. And if Jennifer had refused to take that feedback, well, she might still be working on that script now, and perhaps Frozen would never have got made. I think this is the same as well when you look across, all kinds of fields. The greatest ideas usually come from people who fail and adapt, because they're the people that try the most. And I know it's difficult, and I know it's disheartening. I can't tell you how many times I've had shows turned down. I think we used to have this statistic that 1 in every 100 developments eventually gets made, and that's a really tough thing. But I think it's something you get used to. And as I said, the genius skill is using that feedback and adapting your ideas so that you make them better. So I think this is a good point now to talk about using everything we've learned about getting your ideas, fighting for your ideas, and now you're going to go to that all-important commissioners meeting. How do you put your ideas together and what sells? So, and these might seem like really basic things, but when I've worked with people in the past, or I've spoken to commissioners about kind of what makes, how do you land commissions? What's your top pieces of advice? They always come back to these because it works every time. And I think there's so many ideas, everybody's fighting, that these are the most important, points to think about when you are actually putting your pitches together. And I've been told that the BBC gets something like 200 ideas a week. And so to stand out amongst all those ideas is really daunting. But Kate Phillips, who's responsible for all of the BBC's entertainment strategy, says, the best ideas are the simplest ones, and that you should be able to sum up your idea or describe your show in a couple of sentences. And I think that's really important, because I've been on the other side of the table where, I get ideas sent to me, and often I'm reading through these big pictures, and you can read through pages and pages and you don't really get what the idea is. And I think always coming back to something that's really simple and really strong at getting your idea across, the core idea is what's going to be most effective. And this is often called a log line as well. So it should be really polished, and you need to stress what makes your idea unique. And that's so important, because you can imagine there's just so many ideas that yours really needs to stand out. So if you've got some amazing piece of access, or if there's something significant about why your show is unique now, that's what you need to be drawing out. So for example, if we talk about log lines and what that might sound like, if we go back to It's a Sin, a log line might look like a joyful yet devastating series centered on a group of friends whose lives are changed by the AIDS epidemic. And instantly you kind of get what that is. We know it's about a group of friends. We know it's going to be joyful. There's going to be joyful moments. We know it's going to be heartbreaking. And we know that it's centered around this main theme of the AIDS epidemic. And that would be a really good log line for somewhere like Channel 4, because it has some of those points and some of those words that you might expect a Channel 4 show to have, words like joyful, words like devastating, which I think if it was the BBC, it would maybe be slightly different. Which brings me now on to my next point. So tailoring your description to the right channel in person is, something that not enough people do. And by making sure that you know the channel you're pitching to and adjusting your proposal accordingly, it really does make all the difference. So every channel has different core values, different target audiences, and different tones of voice. And you can go away and find this just by Googling it. And I think it's something really important that you should have in your mind if you are in development. So, for example, we know that Channel 4's programming, they take risks. They like to explore difficult ideas. Whereas BBC is a bit more middle of the road. It's got more of a human tone. And the tone of voice they take is they've just got a warmer relationship with their audiences. So when it comes to actually writing your pitches, I think this is something you really need to have in mind. And often when I've worked in development, I'll have pitches that are tailored to all the channels. So when I was making my show for River of Light, The Bridges, I also had the same idea, but a pitch for BBC that was slightly different. So it was a little bit more focused on the history of the bridges, more focused on the observational documentary, less about this big spectacle kind of light up moment. So I think that's really key to think about, and also thinking about your audience. So if your audience is young or old, and thinking about how that's going to change the tone of your content. Another really important thing is thinking carefully about which commissioner you send it to. So commissioners have said to me in the past, they hate it when either they get a pitch or an email and the person hasn't bothered to kind of change what the blurb is in the email to make it more relevant to that commissioner. And sometimes, people even get names wrong and things like that. And I think that's just something that is like a big no-no, because you're just going to get rejections straight away. And then another thing is to think about, what does that channel want? So if you're coming up with, a big multi-million-dollar project and you're going to send that to a commissioner that just deals with daytime, well, they're not going to have the cash to finance a project like that. So you need to think carefully about which commissioners look after which kind of shows and where they fit in the day. So daytime programming mostly consists of like family and friends content, and that's great if you're pitching a children's show. But if your idea is for a horror series, for example, then you need to pitch that to a nighttime commissioner. So hopefully you can see it's important to match your pitch to the person and the channel that you're pitching to, unless you enjoy getting rejection letters. Another thing that people like to do, and granted, like this takes more time and more energy, it's one of my favorite things to do is, if I think I've got a really good idea, I will make a sizzle reel or a taster tape. Now, basically, this is just a short video. It's no more than 10 minutes. And I really like doing these because in those couple of minutes, it's 10 minutes if you're maybe pitching a really long series and your idea is really complicated. Typically, mine have always been less than 5 minutes. But in those few minutes, basically, you can get across your whole idea for the show. So you can get across the tone, you can get across the concept, you can maybe get across the ideas of your characters. And obviously, this isn't something that you're going to go out and film. So what you would use for a sizzle, sometimes what you can use is just archive footage. Maybe you can find tone of voice, or kind of you can find a style or visual references just from existing TV shows. So that's often what I'll do. And I think that works really well for drama if you're putting ideas together, because commissioners really like it if you say, oh, well, it's a show that's a bit like Gavin and Stacey, but it's a bit like something else and a bit of something else, and you can just pepper in kind of what your ideas are so that they have a clear vision of what it is you're pitching to them. And actually it's a lot more effective than giving them, I don't know, like a 5 to 10 page pitch, which let's face it, they've got so many pitches to read, and it's going to end up sitting on their desk. You know, if you're lucky, they might read it straight away, but I think sending somebody a sizzle that they can just click and open it is brilliant. It's also really good as well if you've got casting, or if you've got particular talent. This is a really great way to you know, get your idea across for who your talent is, and just show a piece of you know, this is what the show could look like. I would put this talent on it, and this is the person that's going to bring it to life, or these are the people that's going to bring it to life. And it also shows that maybe you've got access points as well. I made a couple of years ago the hospital series that I was telling you about. That actually came from a sizzle tape. So it wasn't difficult to convey the idea, but it was difficult to convey the idea of this series having, you know, these joyful yet really sad moments, because some of the children that we actually gave the cameras to, they'd come up with all sorts of things, you know. And even though kids are so resilient with how they see hospital experiences compared to adults, there was just some really surprising and really lovely moments when I went to do a recce and made this sizzle. And I really think if I hadn't have got those, you know, those cute little kids on camera talking about their experience to bring it to life, I just think it wouldn't have got, you know, it wouldn't have got commissioned. And that was what really sold it. So, you know, we pitched it, basically we pitched it, and I think it got greenlit like that week. You know, the commissioner watched the sizzle, they loved it, they could imagine what the series was going to be like. It was going to be, you know, this cast of like adorable kids that were talking about, you know, their experiences and what it was like for them, and they had like a real flavor and a real taste for it. So I think this is, if you can afford to do this, I think this is something that you should definitely think about. And, you know, it's not something that you can just make at your kitchen table while your cat walks by in the background. You need to think of this as being your business card. So it needs to really make a strong impression and leave the other person wanting more. At the end of the day, this is going to be the first impression of your idea that the commissioner is going to get. So you really need to make sure it's a good one, and you need to make sure that it's worth investing your time and money in as well. So another important thing to think about is, if you're going to submit an idea today, it's not going to be ready for broadcast tomorrow. So ideas typically take about 18 months between getting commissioned and being broadcast. So you really need to be thinking about, you know, what ideas are future proof. So I think it was Fleabag that it was commissioned in 2013, and then it didn't actually get shown until 2016. And when they were making that show, you know, at the development stage, they were projecting ahead. And it's the same actually with the film 2012 that was released a couple of years before that. You know, there's always projecting ahead, and you'll find it in tons of films and shows that you watch. But your ideas need to be interesting now so that they appeal to a commissioner, and they also need to be appealing in the future as well. So, for example, if your idea revolves around, you know, a world championship that starts next month, well, then you're too late for that idea. So I think really have in mind that it's going to be a long period for development, and try and have the foresight to think about what's going to be interesting then, even if it's, you know, smaller aspects which can influence your idea. So lots of people choose to make a trend the focus of their idea, and, you know, often those trends might pass. So that works really well for news, which is a much quicker turnaround. But think, you know, if your idea is a trend, is it still going to be relevant in the future? Try and look ahead of time, try and anticipate developments. And actually, if you pitch in person, you know, if you're pitching to commissioners and you get that meeting, that golden meeting, guaranteed they will always ask, you know, why now? Why is this relevant now? So go armed with, you know, be prepared for that, basically have answers for that, because it's a really important question. And I would always try and include something in my pitch which says, you know, why do we need to do this now? And this brings us on to pitching. So many people I know hate pitching. I actually used to hate pitching as well. I really, it took me a long time to actually like it. I used to get so nervous, and especially when I was telling you about the job that I had at 2-4, there were so many ideas that we had, and we'd pitch them in front of each other. And then actually, if your idea was a good one, you would then go and pitch it to a commissioner. And in all honesty, that was the only way that I got good at it, was because I kept doing it. And I stopped eventually. I stopped getting so nervous and anxious about it. But even now and again, if I'm not sure of what I'm saying, or if I haven't researched something properly, quite often I will, those nerves will creep in again, which kind of brings me on to, that first piece of advice there, which is you have to practice. Practicing your pitch is the best and only way to build your confidence and really, really nail it on the day. One way that I do this is I will record myself. So I will practice pitching to myself on Zoom, and then I'll watch it back to see, areas that I can improve. But also just the act of saying, my pitch and going through the words and refining kind of what it is that, I need to do to sell this idea really helps me. And on the day, I just feel much more prepared. And I think that has got to be one of the most important pieces of advice. Another advice is, I think it's fine to use notes. I've gone into pitches, I've gone into commissioning meetings lots of times with notes. And I think, don't hide it. Just make it part of your meeting. Have your notes out in front of you. I think it's absolutely fine. It's a safety net. And just having bullet points or keywords, I think, is a really good way that, if you do forget what you're talking about, you can just spark an idea and then straight away you can elaborate on that. Another thing is, if you have got notes and you're feeling nervous, at least you know that you've got this as a backup. If you do suddenly have that moment where you're like, oh God, I don't know what I'm talking about, or I can't remember where I am. Another thing I try to do, and this sounds really silly and really basic, but just think to yourself, what is the worst that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is you're going to forget a word, you're going to stumble on a word. And at the end of the day, it just makes you really human. People understand that, and it happens all the time. So I think just put things in perspective. And another one I always do is just, if I am nervous, I will try and find a way to relax. Rather than sitting at my desk and just going through things, I think that if you've got time before a commissioning meeting or before you're going to do a big pitch, just go for a walk. Even if you just go around the block and you can listen to some music, or, if you do have time to do some meditation, it does make a real difference. And then I think the last thing to say is, have fun with it. So that might feel really impossible, especially if you're starting out. It's like, how could I possibly have fun with this? But at the end of the day, commissioners are just the same as everybody else. They want to have fun. They don't see this as being a big scary meeting. You're going in for a chat at the end of the day, and you should just treat it as that. Be armed, be prepared with your ideas, and have your notes. And if you've got any kind of materials that you can take in, I think that's great. But just go in there. You just need to smile and look confident, because sometimes, even if you don't feel it, but you just smile, you're going to trick your brain into feeling confident, and it really does help with the anxiety as well. Another thing I do is and this sounds really basic and maybe it sounds a bit silly, I often plan my outfit ahead of time as well. I think there's nothing wrong with power dressing. I think, if you've got an outfit that makes you feel good, wear that outfit on the day and do whatever it takes to make you feel confident. And at the end of the day, don't forget, people don't want to see you fail. So it's really tempting to feel like the audience is against you. But most of the time, they're just glad that it's you pitching and not them. So as long as you prepare and practice and project confidence, you can smash it. So just really quickly, I've put together a slide with some of the books that have helped me with my pitching, and some books that are good for ideas as well. So Greenlit is really good because it just gives you lots of helpful kind of examples from the real world of how things have got made. And the other two there are more biographical. So The Ride of a Lifetime is a really inspiring story, actually, of how the CEO of Disney kind of got his visions and ideas off the ground. And then Creativity Inc. is about how creativity works inside Pixar. And I think both of these have actually really inspired me and can teach us a lot about how important failure is in the process, because they both talk about failure. And that's a huge part of this, kind of going back to what I said at the beginning, is you're not going to get it right overnight. You're going to have times where you do fail, and it's going to feel bad, but it will get easier. So a couple of really quick points to conclude is that, I think people really idealize how great things get made. And, from my examples with Russell and Jennifer, you can see that, everybody has to work hard at it, and ideas don't just come from a lightning bolt and suddenly they get made from overnight. And you have to work really hard, and anyone can do it. I promise. If you force yourself to write down ideas, if you force yourself to write down 5 ideas a day, over time, you are going to get better at doing it. And secondly, just don't stop editing. Everything can always be made better. So find somebody who's going to be a devil's advocate, who's going to come up with reasons why your idea is a bad one. Ask those people who you trust, ask them to look at your ideas critically, and try not to take it to heart, but use it to make your ideas better. And lastly, even truly great ideas, and I'm thinking of Russell and Jennifer on this one, aren't recognized immediately. My view is that getting great ideas made is more about fighting for them than that, one moment of inspiration. So you've got to ask yourself, are you willing to go into battle and enlist allies and even change your carefully thought out ideas, which, you might be really close to, but ultimately that's what's going to help you get it over the line. And if you can do those things, then I think you can get good ideas made, or great ideas made, your best ideas made. But you need to be able to do all of those things. It's part of a process, and it doesn't just come overnight, unfortunately. So I've talked a lot now. That brings me to the end of my talk, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If anybody wants to reach out, or if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to be contacted and have a chat with anyone. Or I've had a few people reach out to me on LinkedIn after the last one with questions, and it's always nice to hear from you. And I think we're going to do some Q&A now. So come in, Vivian.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Sara. That was great. Lots of good advice there. I just kind of noted down ideas, collaboration, allies, persistence, and knowing your audience. And I think what's really important is that that's very universal across different aspects of broadcasting. But I just wanted to ask you a question quickly. And if anyone else has a question, please do put it in the chat. That would be wonderful. But most of your experience is in factual programming, but you made a couple of references to drama, and I just wondered, how easy is it once you're in broadcasting to move between the different genres and the different parts of TV? Because I think lots of us aspire, lots of us love drama, but it always seems something that's like elusive, and it's just out of our reach.
That's a good question. And, I'm sure it's different for everybody that's made that jump, or anybody that's done that, whether they've gone from factual to drama or drama to factual. But I think it all revolves around the same thing, which is, you've got to have that killer idea. You've got to have something really unique. Perhaps it's unique characters, but normally it's a unique story. And once you've got that story, it's just about thinking, how do I build this into a longer narrative? And quite often, if it's only a factual story, well, you'll find that out as you go through the process of making your pitch. I think pitches are actually not only a really good way to try and sell our ideas, I think they're also a really good way for you to determine, will this go anywhere? Because perhaps, once you've started working through your pitch document of this is what a show could look like, this is what half an hour could look like, or an hour, you will have an answer of whether that resonates for a drama audience or a factual audience. but yeah, I think it all begins with that, all begins with that story. If we think about Russell's story, it's the story of the AIDS crisis. Again, that could be made into a documentary. I think what makes his kind of story so unique about that time is the characters that are involved, the way they've told it. It's got a very specific kind of tonal quality about it, which, made it so brilliant.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I agree with them. The first one's from Hannah, who says, "Dear Sara, that was incredibly interesting and it truly sounds like a dream job. I'm wondering how best to break into the industry." And the second one, I'll give you the second one as well because it's similar. What do you think the best way to get started from scratch is in broadcasting for a student or someone who has just graduated? Like, what are the first steps?
So I would say, and I gave this advice in the last talk I did, which is, if you guys missed it, actually, that would have been brilliant for you. But I think the best way is to just go and get a job in an area that you want to be working in TV. Just try and get any kind of role that's going to get a foot in the door. And usually that would be a running role or an assisting role. And, they are difficult to come by, but I think if you can be clever with your approach, if you can personalize your CV, if you can try and get in to go and speak to people, if you can do face-to-face meetings rather than emails, all these things make a huge difference. But I would certainly say that it begins with getting that experience. And my experience, I started in post-production actually. So my first job was a runner at the farm, and that's where they do editing. And for me, I just use that as a stepping stone to learn about the world of TV. How do productions get put together? How are shows edited? And actually, it was a great place to network as well, because you have to be interested in everything that goes on, every part of that process. You need to ask questions and you need to be enthusiastic about it, because that's how people get to notice you, and that's how you're going to eventually get your next step. So I think it is kind of a tough reality, knowing that you've got to go in and start at the bottom. I started off making teas and coffees and, buttering people's toast so that it was so perfectly buttered right to the corners. And, if they wanted Marmite, well, that was another story about like how thick the Marmite had to be. Suddenly you're worrying about the most menial things, but actually you have to worry about those things, because it's all the same in terms of your enthusiasm and your commitment. If you show that you're dedicated and enthusiastic, people will notice that, and you will get those steps that you need to take.
And could I just ask you to mention a bit about who to approach? Because I think in your last presentation you spoke about approaching the production companies, getting the names of the production companies and who to approach within the companies to send your CVs, that really first initial step.
Yeah, I think you have to become a researcher before you do that. So you need to go away and research what are the companies that interest you, because I think when you're face to face with these people, and if it comes to actually getting that all important interview or having that phone chat, they want to know as well why you're interested in that company or that particular area of TV. And as I said, you've got to get enthusiastic about all of it. You've got to fall in love with every aspect of it. And it was the same for me when I had that job in post-production. I had to just, at one point I thought maybe this could be an avenue that I could explore, but I think learn about what companies do, and I would approach those companies first and really tailor your CV. I think that's something that's really important to do. Always find out the name of the person that's in charge of hiring. You can find that out really easily on websites these days. You can go and look at who's in charge of HR or who's in charge of staff, or you can just phone them and ask and just say, look, I'm really interested in getting a runner's job. Like, who's the best person to send my CV into? I think you can even, if you're lucky enough to live in London, I think you can even just go in and meet people, and lots of people do that. And some of my old bosses actually have told me that they prefer it when people do that. If somebody just comes in off the streets, then they say, I'm looking for a job in TV. I want to know how I get started. Can I give you my CV? Can I take your email address? And then follow up from there.
Thank Thank you. Another question is similar again, from Jessica. How easy is it to move into this if you're a mid-career freelance print journalist? I often work on stories that I think would make great TV docs, but don't know how to go about it.
That's a really great question. And actually, somebody asked me about this last week. And I said to her, I was like, oh, so she's got some really brilliant ideas, actually. I said, have you written them up? Have you put them into a pitch? She said, oh, no, I haven't done that yet. And I said, look, why don't you pick what you think is your best idea and put it into a pitch to see if it works as a TV format, first of all. And then, I'll take a look at it for you and kind of we'll take it from there. But I think the first thing to do is, and there's loads of resources online for this, go and find out how you write a pitch document for TV. I mean, if you're working in print already, I'm sure you're already doing that. I'm sure you're brilliant at it. Find out how it translates into TV. And I would have a go at actually writing it up for TV. And once you've got that, you could get meetings with production companies and ask them if they're interested in your idea. I mean, you can just tell them about your background and where you're from and the kind of things you've done. And if you're able to send them a pitch, guaranteed that, development teams, people working in those development teams will get back to you. I know in all the kind of past jobs that I've had when I've been on development teams, we had a lot of kind of cold emails come in from people, and we would always read them. We'd always look if it was a good idea and always meet somebody. And, if you're from that industry anyway, I think that's such a brilliant start. So you should definitely, shout about that and kind of what you've worked on. But I think if you have a pitch document, that's just going to help the people reading it to really understand and get what the idea is and how it translates onto TV.
Thank you. I mean, just to add to that, Jessica, I completely agree. I just think the industry, everyone's hungry for good ideas. And I think if you're a mid-career freelancer, you know what a good idea is. So I think even if it's not a perfect pitch, they should be able to spot the good ideas. So it's just a matter of you finding who to send it to, whether it's something that will work panorama, whether it's something that will work with another genre. It's just sort of getting it out there. And just sharing and proving that you've got a great idea, and they will do the rest of it. They will translate it into television. Another question in our last few minutes. Sophia asks, can I ask for some advice for someone whose mother language isn't English and who wants to work in broadcast news journalism? What's the best route possible, and the role to start with?
So again, what I would say is, it depending on your experience before, I'd be really confident about what experience you do have. If you've already been in the industry before, all experience is good experience, and actually languages is a great skill to have, especially, for certain genres, or if you're working in news as well, I think is such a great skill to have. When I was at ITN, we'd often be looking for people that could speak different languages, and sometimes it would be for translation, sometimes it would be for assisting on shoots, but we would definitely put in job adverts out. And I think you just need to lean into it. If you've got skills, shout about them, and then lean into the fact that you can speak different languages, and actually maybe do a bit of research onto what shows might use people that have those language skills, and then target them with your CV or give them a call. But I would hope that there's lots out there for you. I think maybe just do a bit of research into particular shows that might be relevant to your language.
Thank you. There's another question from Adriana, following on from Jessica's question. She's a news reporter and wants to know if if it's a good idea to cold pitch, or will they just it's a good idea to cold pitch, and would they take you on to work on it? And what stops them from stealing your idea? Even if it's part-time or working around your day job, how will they take you on?
Good. Sorry, where did you say, what background was it from?
News reporter.
News reporter. So in the first instance, I would take the idea to somebody I trusted. If you've got anybody that you trust within your organization, Because you're right. I think if you've got something really good and maybe you are worried about them stealing the idea, I think it's really important to actually, another thing is, again, with pitching, maybe having your idea in a pitch document or something where you can put your name on it so that they know that this is owned by you. And then I would maybe arrange a meeting, you know, with somebody in your organization or somebody that you trust where you think this idea could work. I would always go for that as my first port of call. In terms of trying to get it looked at by, you know, other production companies that maybe you don't have any ins with, I think that is slightly trickier, and you can never be sure that people kind of won't steal your idea. So I think you just need to make yourself really valuable to that, or invaluable to that process, by perhaps having something that only you can bring to it. So if it's a key relationship with somebody involved in the idea, then you can kind of say that that's why your involvement's so key, and actually you will then be close to it the whole way through too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd also say that part of the, you need to negotiate what your role is on it. Sometimes they will just buy the idea and pay for it that way, or maybe you want to negotiate a certain number of hours or a research role on it, perhaps. But I think, again, it depends on the strength of the idea and how integral you are to that idea. Are there any more questions? I think maybe we've got quick time for one more, if there's one. No, it looks like. Oh. Okay, if everyone can check the chat. I mean, we've got some great events coming up, and Hilly's just listed some of them that are forthcoming. So please do check our website and remind yourself of the events. I just wanted to say we are out of time now. First of all, thank you so much, Sara, for sharing your knowledge and your know-how with so much enthusiasm and passion. But more importantly, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us this evening. And as I've said, we have got other events planned, so it'll be lovely for you to come back again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me too. Bye, everyone.